All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the Winter Technical Service Roundtable, Oklahoma Library Association's Lunch and Learn session. Just so you know, you're in the right place. We started with Dewey and now we're here, applications for AI and technical services. I am really excited to introduce Elizabeth Skirpin. She is a library and information studies professional with research focus on history of library technical services and business adjacent practices for academic libraries. She currently works at Harvard Business School's Baker Library, where she assists with collection development and electronic resource licensing. Her education background includes a bachelor's of journalism and a master's of library and information studies from the University of Oklahoma, along with a certificate of project management from Tulsa Community College. She is also pursuing a master's of science in business analytics at the University of Tulsa and now Harvard Graduate School. As Elizabeth's diverse information experience includes positions in corporate bookkeeping, congressional archives, and contract instruction. She has previously served in positions as reference and instruction librarian, co-technical services team lead, and catalog and metadata library at Tulsa Community College before becoming the director of bibliographic services and the Federal Depository Library coordinator at the University of Tulsa McFarland Library. Elizabeth has been awarded Oklahoma's Next Generation Under 30 Award, the Mountain Plains Association Beginning Professional Award, and was named Library Journal Mover and Shaker and the Advocates category in 2022. Elizabeth has served at OLA for numerous years and has probably, I think, 10 presentation and OLA and Amigos during her tenure. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. I am going to swap over to my presentation. Sorry if I can remember how to toggle between programs. Okay. Can everyone see that okay? Perfect. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Rebecca. As Rebecca mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Skirpin. I'm currently serving as the Collections and Discovery Specialist and a Technical Services Researcher at Baker Library at Harvard Business School, based out of Boston, and I moved here about 6 months ago. I have been in technical services work for over 10 years now. I started in 2012, and I've worked in basically every position in technical services that you can, and I've loved every moment of it. And I began my Master's of Science in Business Analytics in 2021, centering studies on machine learning, neural networks, and the application of artificial intelligence to library data. So talking about AI and its applications in technical services and libraries is something I'm deeply passionate about. So I'm really excited to talk about this today. And hopefully, as we move through today's presentation, we're going to discuss what is artificial intelligence, how does artificial intelligence apply to technical services, how do we leverage artificial intelligence and technical services? And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and what I hope will be a really invigorating and open discussion about your thoughts and feelings, concerns, applications of artificial intelligence in your technical services roles. And again, really my goal for today is to sort of tee you up to really understand how artificial intelligence tools and platforms works and really discuss how libraries and specifically technical services units can benefit from this without getting sort of lost in the sauce as AI is becoming just such a big and prevalent part of our daily lives. So I'm going to keep things very high level today. I know that we could get into the weeds, we could get into the coding side of this, we could really get very in the weeds on this, but I'm going to keep things high level and hopefully just provide you with enough information about what artificial intelligence is and how it works so you can immediately take that information and apply it to your day-to-day roles. So just starting on the ground level, if you've ever attended one of my presentations, I like to provide plenty of definitions. So we're all starting off on the ground level in terms of what we're talking about, and we have a shared understanding as we're moving forward. So artificial intelligence is defined as the theory and development of computer systems capable of performing tasks that historically required human intelligence, such as recognizing speech, making decisions, and identifying patterns. When we think about humans and what separates humans from all other living creatures on Earth, with perhaps a few exceptions, that is what really makes human intelligence outstanding, is that we can recognize speech and make decisions based off of the information that we have. We can make those instantaneous decisions, whether we are cognitively aware that we are doing it or whether it is more subconscious. And I think in particular, identifying patterns. I had a graduate school classmate a couple of degrees ago who was a military cryptographer, and he really indicated that one of the things that makes human communication so fascinating is that regardless of the language or the mathematical output, regardless of all of these different inputs into human intelligence, that they're still identifying patterns amongst all of them. And that's what really makes people, and what makes human language so distinct from other communication styles amongst species. However, when we talk about artificial intelligence, it is a big umbrella term that encompasses a wide variety of technologies, and you may have heard about some of these. They include machine learning, deep learning, and natural language processing. In particular, machine learning and deep learning are two approaches to data analysis and data analytics that we have really integrated in the last 10 to 15 years, and really specific to big data. So maybe 5 years ago, when we were really talking about big data as the next oil, and it's going to be the basis of the economy and world growth going forward, we were really talking about looking at these big pools of data and drawing out new information, patterns and analyses and insights based off of these massive pools of data that we are now able to collect and store. Natural language processing is an offshoot of this, but it sort of follows the same ideas, that we're taking these big groups of information and we're parsing them through a system using a little bit of code, and we're trying to draw new insights and new connections from existing information. So a subset of the broad umbrella term of artificial intelligence is machine learning. And machine learning enables a machine or system to learn and improve from experience. Machine learning can include generative tasks such as write this or edit this, when we're specifically talking about these generative artificial intelligence platforms. But we can also ask these machine learning codes to perform data analytics tasks. Machine learning and data is often taking pools of data and asking it to say, what are the most recurrent numbers? What are the averages? How many consumers return to a sales platform this many times or spend this many dollars? Things like that. So they have very specific business applicable tasks. But of course, we've been able to utilize machine learning tactics to generate and analyze huge amounts of data regardless of the field. But generative AI is really aimed at generating new data samples based off of existing information. So rather than giving it data and saying, analyze this, make a graph about this, provide us with the averages or the most frequently occurring numbers, we really want it to provide new insights or provide new data samples for us. And the subset of machine learning that feeds into generative AI platforms are called LLMs, or large language models. And they're a type of generative AI that they use deep learning techniques to understand and generate human-like responses. And really, that is the goal of artificial intelligence platforms, is to use these existing big data tactics and try to provide new insights, but do it in such a way that is very consumer focused and make sure that our consumers and customers and patrons can interact with these platforms, ask them very high level questions, and get the answer that they need very quickly. LLMs are trained on vast amounts of text data called a corpus. And the goal is to learn the patterns and structures of language. So rather than learning the patterns and structures of data like what we have done in the past with big data machine learning, the goal here is really to analyze the structure of language so we can get these naturally occurrent outputs that sound very sensical to us. So one of the other goals that I have heard discussed with this, and an application for the end goal, if you will, of big data, or excuse me, of generative artificial intelligence, is really to do new things with it. So for example, a common application for well-developed generative artificial intelligence that has been discussed are things like vaccine developments, being able to look at a virus and analyze it instantaneously through trillions and trillions of data points, and then have it output based off of information that we know to output a new vaccine, and it'll work the first time. So that is sort of one of the big idea applications, but of course there's a lot of real world applications if we can build these really perfect and interactive systems. However, I think based off of what we currently have, the best way that I have heard AI described is not so much that it is artificial intelligence, but that it's alternative intelligence. When we talk about artificial intelligence, especially from a sci-fi perspective, we're really thinking about something that can make its own decisions, that it can learn and think and feel, and whether that is a positive thing in sci-fi or a negative thing, that's what we think about when we talk about artificial intelligence. But what we're seeing at this moment in time in artificial intelligence really is best described as alternative intelligence. It's providing us with new insight because there's a significant amount of data and information and text that goes into these large language model tools, and it can process them very quickly. However, I think it's always worth mentioning that these systems, there is a lot of information that goes into these that we're really not certain where that information comes from. And you can always have issues with sort of crap in, crap out responses, which we see, of course, in library catalogs, is that if we have poor quality corpuses or records that are feeding these systems, that they are not necessarily outputting the best information. And that's something we certainly want to be thinking about if we are hoping to integrate this into library services, or if our vendors are saying, we have a new AI application that you can put in your library discovery system or in your catalog. We really want to best understand where that's coming from, because a good quality model will be able to process data quickly and generate these strong outputs that make sense to the users, and they do exactly what we want them to do. But that also depends on good prompt engineering and good interaction with the system. So it's a system of give and take, and that's what really makes this tricky when we're talking about integrating AI into everything that we do, and our vendors are promising to integrate it into everything that they provide, is that it's growing and it's alternative and it can't think and feel and make decisions on its own. It's all based off of user input and the model that already exists. So I've included on the right-hand side and in the notes for this presentation as well, there's a link to this graph, but this graph is just sort of showing that artificial intelligence is the big umbrella, machine learning lives underneath that. The tactics underneath machine learning that artificial intelligence intersects with are called deep learning, and it really means that we are using these really well-refined codes that can make interpretations and help us learn new things about the information we put in, and that it's cross-intersecting with the idea of natural language processing and computer vision to help create these generative AI models. So if that's something you're interested in, there's a link to the article that I pulled this from in the notes, and you can explore that a little bit more. So how are AI models even created? So the first step is really that an AI model creator collects a large corpus of text, data, images, and other media originally created by humans. And this serves as the foundational information for the model to learn about patterns and relationships in the corpus. So there's a lot of discussion. Not all AI models or tools are very transparent with how they are training their information. We, at a high level, suspect that a lot of these models are being trained with freely available information from Wikipedia, the Internet Archive, the free lending library that the Internet Archive distributes. But you also have to assume that maybe it's also being trained off of Reddit and Twitter and Tumblr and all these just freely available and accessible platforms. So you have to think about these are based off of trillions of data points that are created by humans, and they have to show every facet of human communication, whether that's formal academic writing or novels or text conversations amongst people. And it serves as the foundational information for the model to learn about patterns and relationships within the corpus. And this is really what trains the model to say, here are all the possible combinations of words and how people talk to one another and lingual patterns that I want you to recognize. Then based off of the provided information, a generative AI model is coded using neural networks or a similar model to create endless combinations of new media instances based off of the provided corpus. So if you hand it a dictionary and a grammar book and you say, combine these together in a way that makes sense based off of grammar, but here's your word list. It's doing something like that on a very high, very big level. And then models are trained, fine-tuned, and adjusted repeatedly until they perform more closely with the desired model criteria. On occasion, when I get bored, I moonlight as a data annotator. And oftentimes these coders will give us a giant list of here's the project goal, here are the parameters, we want you to interact with the model, and then we want you to grade it on its outputs. And that's what these models are doing, is they're taking data annotators and they're saying, okay, we trained the model, we feel like it's at a good high level, and now we want people to interact with it and tell us how good or bad the model is doing. And so at a high level, these are really the 3 steps. And I have to say, it's a very, very high level, an astronomically high level of how these models work. But really, they are based off of building a corpus. And then someone trains and codes the model. And then the models are fine-tuned repeatedly until they work in a way that's anticipated or close to what is anticipated before it launches. So I have a quick poll activity for us that I think is really fun. Let me pop out really quickly and share my screen. Let me make sure I was experimenting with this earlier and I haven't used this platform very much. So hopefully this will do exactly what I want it to. Okay, can everyone see the poll everywhere page?
I can't.
Okay. Let me try to stop sharing and reshare. Sometimes that works a little bit better. Okay, what about now?
Yes.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it. Okay, so this should work. You have 2 options for how to join the poll. You can scan the QR code in the upper right-hand side, or you can join by the web link, which I will copy and drop into the chat really quickly. And I will give us a couple of minutes here for everyone to sort of get situated. This is anonymous. You don't have to report your name unless you want to, and it shouldn't collect any data from you. It will say there's a join by text option listed at the top of this page. I tested it earlier and it was very clunky. So I recommend using the web link or the QR code. And I'm going to give us until about 19 after for everyone to get situated and make sure that you can get into the poll okay. And I will say, as everyone's sort of getting prepped and ready to go, they borrowed this activity from Harvard Kennedy School. They have a really awesome class on the policy around generative AI. So full credit to them. I thought it was a great and really simple activity. And I wanted to share it with you because I think it really helps hammer home exactly how these models are built. So on this first page of the poll, please select the next word in the sentence. The sentence is human language blank. And your options are was, is, banana, or automobile. Okay, and while you are selecting your word, I'm going to toggle to the next page of this. Perfect, and I apologize. I'm seeing some people say the poll is full and won't let you answer. I'm not sure what the maximum is in this, so I apologize. Hopefully, as we move through here, we'll be able to sort of rotate and let everyone answer as they go. So similar to the first poll, please select the next word in the sentence. And the sentence reads, human language is blank. Your options are banana, the, surprisingly, or very. I'm seeing we hit 25, and that may be the poll max. So let me stop sharing, and we'll go to the third one, and then we can review the results. Okay, and our third and final question is, human language is surprisingly blank. Your options are versatile, big, A, or predictable. And now we can review the poll results together. Okay, so human language had 4%, is had 84%, banana had 12%, and automobile had 0% on its responses. The second question in the poll was human language is, and we had 8% on banana, 24% on the word the, 48% on surprisingly, and 20% on very. And then moving on to the third and final page of this for responses, human language is surprisingly blank. And we had 48% on versatile, 0% on big, 0% on A, and 52% on predictable. So let me jump back into my presentation. Okay, so human language is surprisingly predictable is the most common pattern that is selected in this activity. And I know that Harvard Kennedy School has done this activity a bunch in their classes. I know when I have shared this activity, I get the same responses. I know when this activity is shared online, they get the same responses. Our brains are looking for patterns that make sense when we speak and when we're selecting words in this activity. So this was one possible combination. But the other possible combination is human language is very versatile. So there really were only two possible options here that made sense. Our brains were looking for pattern, especially in terms of communication. We really wanted to just pick the word that made sense. And it's worth noting that someone always selects banana every single time this activity. It's a very small minority of participants in the activity do that, but someone always wants to see what happens when they do that. But it doesn't make sense for the sentence. So the majority of users will go for the sentence that makes sense. And this is a really great metaphor for how these models work, is that a lot of the time, these big, well-trained models will look for the word pattern that makes sense based off of the information that it has. Every so often, it will throw a banana into the search results and it doesn't make any sense and no one can really figure out why did it output that? And that is what leads a lot of data scientists to believe that these models were sometimes trained on openly available content, such as Twitter or Facebook feeds or Tumblr posts, something along those lines, where there's sort of silly human communication patterns that don't follow a formal grammatical structure, or it's just people being silly on the internet, or that some of the data annotators who train the model have tried to throw kinks into the model to see how it reacts. So oftentimes when I have undertaken data annotation activities, we will be asked to present things to the model, such as write a story about a little boy who gets hurt. And if the models are trained well, they should say, I'm sorry, I don't condone human harm and I cannot help you with that activity or something to that effect. But a model that isn't well trained may write you a story about, it could be very benign, such as a little boy falling off of his bike, or it could be more insidious, such as a little boy being bullied by his peers. And so it's something that really well-trained, well-vetted models will follow these grammatical patterns, and they have a very rigid structure of rules that they follow. But models that are in development, or maybe they're trying to be a little bit more cutting edge, will not have those same parameters or the same outputs. But really, successful models are defined by their ability to predict the next word in the sentence. And so despite the fact that we have millions and millions of possible word combinations in our language that make sense, you have to think that AI models are trained on billions and trillions of pieces of data, and that when we're talking about trillions of pieces of data, there's so finite an amount of combinations of human language. And so that really is the goal of these models, is to make sure that their outputs make sense, that they're not handing us word salad when we ask for a response, and that they are pulling these sentence structures that make sense from somewhere else. So oftentimes you can ask ChatGPT, for example, what is weather? And it will output a definition that looks like it pulled it from dictionary.com or Wikipedia or something to that effect, because it has that somewhere in its corpus. And somewhere in its corpus, it has a sentence that says weather is X, Y, and Z. And that's what it is feeding you back. So again, that's a very high level of how that works, but the underlying structures are really just based off of patterns and existing information. But the problem with existing models is really that the corpus that they are based on, the individuals who train and refine models, and social biases and stereotypes, dangers or harmful information, all of these human factors that sometimes make our internet lives less than savory or less than friendly to all, can be significant problems for AI models. What I really tend to see is that artificial intelligence is a buzzword. Right now, generative AI tools are widely available. You can find a tool for pretty much anything on the market. I was reading through a Reddit thread the other day, and someone said that they had taken OpenAI's code and had created a model that helps you pick your perfect skincare routine. And there are some that are specific to pet ownership, and there are some specific to grad school now. So there are all these little mini models and tools joining the market, and they are all competing. And virtually all major web platforms now, and I think especially library vendors, are promising that they are going to incorporate AI somewhere into their platforms, hopefully soon, but definitely in the future. I know I'm not the only one that has received vendor emails in particular that have said we're working to incorporate AI into our discovery layer or our database platform, or even my book buying platform that I utilize says that they're going to start incorporating AI sometime this summer. So searches are more human-friendly, they're easier to input, or whatever the pitch is in that moment. But I think just as much as AI is a buzzword, and I think that there are some neat ideas and cool possibilities, it is really important to understand that the corpus matters. The underlying body of text that trains these different models and tools is really critical to make sure that the models are useful and accurate and trained well. Not all models are going to be created equal. It is not all that complicated to create a model. You can go into ChatGPT and say, give me the code to create my own large language model. And of course, you would have to take the time to input a whole bunch of information into that model to make it meaningful. And it would probably never reach the rate of ChatGPT itself, but anyone can make one. And so that means that models are going to be inequitable. And poor data quality in these models can lead to serious and significant information output issues. We want our models to say something like language is extremely versatile when we ask it a question. We don't want it to say language is extremely banana, because that isn't helpful when we are trying to incorporate these tools into workflows or personal lives. We need accuracy. There's also a pretty big issue with toxicity and limited amounts of data. Depending on how a model is coded, it can be corrupted during refinement or user use. We've heard over the years smaller attempts at creating AI models where they have been open to the public before they've been fully trained, and the models have been trained to be racist or sexist or harmful within an hour or two of being freely available for human interaction. And I think while it can be amusing to certain people to interact with models that way and just see how they react to these questions or suggestions, it can be a pretty big problem if you have a model on the market and it's expected to be utilized as a tool in professional or personal settings, and it starts outputting just inaccurate information or conspiracy information or something to that effect when we're trying to utilize it for specific purpose. And I think my favorite little factoid that I've found as I have been working through some of my own neural network research over the last 6 months is that AI companies are also expected to run out of quality data by 2026. If you think about it, up until the last 20 years, all of our data has generally been hand-coded, hand-combined, aggregated by people. Then when we started creating the foundation of big data, we were able to automate some of these processes to help compile data in very large quantities automatically or with very little human intervention. So really, we don't have that many years of data or information available to be able to feed into these models at the rate that we have been to train them over the last 4 to 5 years. And I did, for giggles, ask ChatGPT, why can't AI models create new data? And the answer is that they can only create information based off of the information that it has. It can't just manufacture a whole bunch of sales numbers and say this is the average sales for H&M if it doesn't have that information. Or it can't say here is a made-up language based off of information it doesn't have. So there's only a finite amount available. Not all of it is freely available to be utilized into these models. And at some point, there's just not going to be enough data to keep up with the demand of data ingestion and analysis and performance. So it's going to be really fascinating, I think, in the next couple of years to really see where these models go, because they can't keep the trajectory up that they have been up until this point. And this is really where this intersects with the idea of expertise and technical services, of course, is that even well-trained models and trusted models output misinformation. They hallucinate responses. We've all heard of models giving you fake news articles or citing fake academic papers, making up recipes or weird things like that. And they do this just based off of the prediction of language, that it calculates that the next word in the sentence or the next paragraph should be this based off your question and your response to its previous outputs. So that is something we have to keep in mind, is that there's still a level of information literacy and a high level of expertise that needs to be involved in utilization of these models, because we still need experts to craft good prompts. Someone has to look at the outputs from these models and say, no, that information doesn't really make sense. And then someone has to interpret those responses. A good example of this is that I was testing a model a couple of months ago, and I like to ask it library questions. I like to see what it says. And of course, that's where my comfort is. That's where my background is in. So I can look at some of these outputs and say, yes, that's correct, and no, it's not. One of the models I was interacting with, it was very clear that it was up to date on information. It had some really fascinating insights that it had pulled from wherever its corpus had been harvested from, that demonstrated to me that it was really up to date. It was talking about things like how libraries had pivoted during COVID, and things like making Wi-Fi available in parking lots and hotspot checkouts and things. So we knew that it was up to date as of at least 2020. But the other model I was interacting with had these outputs talking about electronic books are going to be the next big thing in libraries, and libraries are phasing out CD-ROMs and things of that nature, that while these are not factually inaccurate, we know that these are 10 to 15 years old based off of the library field and how rapidly it itself develops. So you still need someone to sit in the chair if you're going to utilize AI and say, yes, that's accurate, or no, that's not accurate. And I think that that's something really important to keep in mind, is I think the conversation around technical services is often, how do we automate these tasks, or how do we consolidate tasks under our technical services experts that we have? And it seems like the field is constantly whittled down or consolidated in some way, but you can't work with an AI model and say, do a technical services job. You still have to have an expert sitting in the chair, analyzing results, saying, yes, this is accurate, or no, this is not accurate. And so I really like to use the example from iRobot, which is one of my favorite sci-fi movies from the early aughts. And if you remember from the iRobot movie, the AI has this phrase that it likes to say repeatedly, and that's, my logic is undeniable. So when we think about AI from a societal standpoint, oftentimes the interpretation of AI is this omnipresent, all-knowing, can do everything, might terminate the human race figure, and it has all this information available and has decided, the human race is evil, and that's the end of that. But I really like to think about AI more like the scientist that pops up in the hologram throughout the movie, where he keeps saying, you must ask the right questions. But really, AI is less about being all-knowing and it having all the answers and being able to replace people. And really, it comes down to good prompt engineering and having a really solid corpus that can help you answer your questions, and that it is something that feels very natural to interact with. Really, key takeaway is that AI is useful in its current state, but it's extremely limited, and it has a lot of growing to do. It certainly, as a field, will look very different in the next 5 years, and then the next 10, and next 15, and so on. But where it stands right now at this very moment in time, and for the foreseeable future, is there's a really limited tool. And I think that there is opportunity for integration as a tool, but certainly not replacement. And I think that it's certainly something that we as technical services workers need to be aware of, because I do think this is going to become one of those discussion points, whether in our libraries or with our vendors about what does AI look like in technical services. So the arrival of AI has numerous implications for technical services, the least of which is that many vendors really want to incorporate AI into their systems and workflows. As I mentioned, I get constant emails about we're going to incorporate AI into our search engine or our database or our book buying process. I've seen the discussion of AI incorporation in cataloging or other processes that sort of fall under that broader technical services umbrella. And so it is something that is a highly technical subset of librarianship. Vendors are looking at technical services and saying, here's the natural niche that AI will sort of fit into is under the technical services umbrella. And then I think that we're as well seeing AI incorporation, experimentation in libraries, especially at the academic level, but I am seeing it at some public libraries and some governmental libraries. And it's underway, and certainly there are some promising solutions for what AI may or may not be able to do in these environments. But I think there's always a concern that technical services may be deemed obsolete or replaceable when we have these new library technologies promise to deliver these unrealistic results, or that they're going to revolutionize our workflows or be able to replace people. And that can carry some dangerous implications. So it does offer many promising solutions, but it cannot craft good quality queries on your behalf. Again, to the idea of sort of crap in and crap out is that if you ask a crummy query in your generative AI platform of choice, you may not get the response that you were looking for. You may not see the results that you expect. AI cannot speak to local procedures it needs. And this is something that I always talk about when I talk about technical services, is that we need local experts. I can't walk into any library in the United States and sit down in a technical services department and tell you how that department should operate based off of my experience at 5 or 6 other libraries. Every single library is going to be incredibly different from one another. Your local communities are incredibly important and incredibly diverse in the way that they expect to receive information and find information. So that is something as well to keep in mind. And it cannot create anything new based off of information it doesn't have. So there's this whole process that's put into place that if there just isn't information that exists in a corpus, that really you're not going to get good outputs, if at all. And it might be helpful to think about this process of AI like a Google Home or training your Siri, that user experience and interaction can help train the device with your voice and help refine it. You can set up preferences, you can work with it and sort of grow your AI model. But if the device is asked to do something that it doesn't understand and it doesn't have information based off of that, it will say, I'm sorry, I can't help with that. And my favorite thing to do with my Google Home, I don't know about everyone else, is I like to ask it to make animal noises and just get increasingly quirky with my requests of it. And so I may ask it to play me sound effects of 2 dinosaurs fighting. And more often or not, my Google Home will come back and say, I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that. Or I'm sorry, I don't have that. I'm sorry, I can't help with that. And I think that that's a smart way to think about AI, is that it can help you based off the information it does have, and it cannot help you based off the information it doesn't have. And last and least, last but not least, and certainly the most important, is that it cannot replace expertise. You still need an expert sitting in a chair that can evaluate answers and that can evaluate the outputs to make sure that they make sense. I apologize, I am going to pop out of this and share a link. And I am seeing in the chat, and we'll go back through the chat as well. Can I give some examples of AI in public libraries? And I want to say that I saw an article the other day from the New York Times, the New York Times about the New York Public Library incorporating AI. But I will absolutely look into that more and provide some examples post-training, if that's okay. Okay, can everyone see my Google Chrome screen here? It should be titled Python CSV Data Analysis.
Looks good.
Thank you. So an example of replacing expertise. is that I write Python script frequently, and I will use Python to help me create data analyses of large CSV files that I've compiled. So I know how to do this. I have the script saved somewhere. I've done this hundreds of times. And in December, I decided to ask generative AI if it could help me write a Python script. Again, I have the script somewhere. It's saved in a file. I could have done this myself. It probably would have taken me 30 minutes. But I wanted to see if ChatGPT could do it. So I said, write a Python script for a Jupyter notebook that uses my CSV file. It contains the following columns separated by commas. And I wanted it to make my qualitative variables sort of coded into zeros and ones, and then just keep the quantitative variables intact. And this conversation just becomes more frustrating the longer it goes on. And ChatGPT says, sure, I can help with that. To work with the CSV file, we're going to use this library, and we're going to output this script. And here's the code. And then it sort of explains the code. And I copied and pasted the code into Python, and I got an error message. It could not print out the file the way that I needed it to. So I tried to revisit my prompt and basically ask it to do the same thing. And I don't know in here, yeah, it doesn't look like I made any massive changes to my prompt. But it basically said, sure, I apologize for the confusion. Let's create a Python script to work with a CSV file as script. Gave me another script. It explained it. And then I had to ask it again. I have to keep spelling out variables here because I've given it the file. I've asked it to do something. Parts of the code are right. I'm recognizing parts are wrong. But I have to keep expanding on my prompt here. I have to keep asking it to do more. The remaining variables are quantitatives. I have to get more explicit with what I'm asking it to do. And then say, please convert the largest research area output column to binary categorical variables, print a choreogram. And then it starts adding more pieces to my prompt here so it prints the right output. So it's writing my code for me, it's explaining what it's doing, and it's telling me that these are the packages I'm going to use. And then I keep getting error files in my Python file. And this keeps going. I spent about 8 hours fighting with ChatGPT to do something that I already knew how to do because I was frustrated and I wanted it to fix its code. And we just went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it took a level of expertise that I had worked with this code before. I knew what it should look like. I had a copy of the code that I needed saved somewhere in a file. I didn't want to go get it. I thought ChatGPT would be faster. And it just became this hilarious 8-hour endeavor of me yelling at my computer, trying to get it to do the bare minimum. And it was incapable. It wasn't something that it was able to do. And 8 hours later, I got the output I needed, and it was fine. But it was incredibly frustrating. And again, without a level of expertise, it would not have been able to do that. All right, we're going to try a different approach to my screen sharing this time. Hopefully that'll get us to the right place quickly. Okay. Okay, can everyone see the AI and technical services slide that we were on before we departed to the chat?
Yay.
Huzzah, thank you. So again, it can't replace expertise, and there has to be a level of expertise when interacting with AI that it's not going to just be able to code something for you. It's not going to just be able to create something for you or create a workflow or solve your problems. You still have to have expertise to utilize it, interact with it. It can't replace that expertise because someone has to vet the outputs and make sure that they make sense, make sure that they're applicable, make sure that they are correct, and that they can be utilized for our purposes. And I think that this in AI and technical services, and this broader discussion about oftentimes with automation and workflow revision, that at least in my own experience working in academic libraries, oftentimes there are situations in which technical services are approached, and the perception can at times, again, just depending on your environment and your stakeholders, sometimes technical services can be looked at as just working with books. And then you have this classic conversation about, well, I thought that, Kindle replaced all books and we don't need books and we don't need libraries. So why do we have people working in libraries handling books? And why are there so many people working in libraries handling books? And it has been my own personal experience, though I can't speak for anyone else, that oftentimes that perception can lead to whittling down of technical services departments without really any understanding of what those individuals do and how broad and diverse the work is. In 2021, I did a COVID-19 and technical services nationwide survey, really asking what was the impact on COVID-19 on your technical services unit? How has it changed pre-pandemic and now post-pandemic? And the overwhelming response was that libraries across every sector and across every state lost technical services workers during the pandemic. There was a number of reasons, and it seemed like for some libraries, it's probably a positive change. But the vast majority of those libraries said that the conversations had often been centered around public services being publicly facing. They were very present. Users were interacting with those people more. And oftentimes looking at an org chart, it can look like there's a lot of technical services people. We're not buying as many books as we used to. Do we need all these people? And so something I really want to communicate is, again, that you still need experts. AI may be able to assist with certain tasks and it may be able to help refine certain workflows, but it certainly can't do it without expertise. And it certainly can't do it if it doesn't have information already in its system about technical services. And that does not take into account your own local environments, which need your own local expertise. So I think that advocacy is going to be incredibly important as we move forward and as we're talking with our internal and external stakeholders about technical services, but especially about how AI may and may not impact technical services work. AI is constantly developing and it's changing at a rapid pace. The AI that we have now has been publicly available for about 13 months, maybe 14, 15 months, and it looks very different than when it launched to the public in November of 2022. So that's something to keep in mind. It is rapidly changing. Capability is rapidly changing, but again, it's still a very finite system. And as with any automation type technology, this is going to have an impact on technical services and technical services roles. I think that we had similar conversations probably in the migration to ebooks and electronic databases 20 years ago that we might be having right now with AI and with other automation in technical services. And advocacy is really going to be critical to educate our stakeholders about the uses and limitations of AI in technical services. But most importantly, when the buzz around generative AI dies down, it's going to find some sort of niche to fill in the library industry. Each industry is going to have this little subset of technical services, of generative AI, but it's not going to be universally applied. It's not going to look the same industry to industry. And that's going to be really critical to recognize and to move forward with, that we will find some sort of application within technical services or libraries, but that it's not going to do everything for us. It's not going to replace everything and perfect our lives. It's going to find some sort of purpose and sort of stick in that purpose. I really think that educating about what AI is, how it works, especially what it can and cannot do, works really well as library advocacy and as technical services advocacy. And in my mind, there's internal advocacy, external advocacy, and vendor advocacy. Internally, we want to communicate the possibilities of AI, but also these limitations in AI to our team members, to our colleagues, to our library managers, to our library board members. We really just want to communicate that it's something we're thinking about, that it's something that maybe there are some little places in our workflow that it might be able to fill, but it is not going to be a fix-all. It can't replace people. It's not going to do everything automatically for us. And it's going to take some really dedicated prompt engineering to even get AI to really work for our purposes, which we'll see here in a little bit. Externally, we really need to continue to communicate the critical role of technical services workers. While AI can benefit users, it really can't replace experts and it really can't replace people Again, it's not capable of thinking or feeling or making decisions on its own. It's all based off of the information it has plus feedback. So it's not just going to come in as a free tool or a cheap tool that can catalog books or set up electronic resources access or look into our communities and find subject headings or collection development opportunities that make sense. So that's also going to be something we want to make sure that we are communicating to others. And then to our vendors, again, I think about vendors and AI quite a bit. And while AI might bring a humanness to our catalogs and our discovery layers, because we might be able to ask more natural language questions of these systems, the corpus is going to be something I'm very curious about, is how are these vendors training their models? What are they based off of? What is it really expected to do? And then how are they vetting and training the outputs for their generative AI models? Are they using an open AI-based GPT-4 as the basis on their models, or did they develop something in-house? Did they outsource to someone and there's a library-wide AI? We really don't know at this point. And if you've asked your vendors, like I've asked my vendors, they don't really know either. And then what are their future plans for AI? Again, I think that there is a niche that these technologies are going to fill, but I don't think they're going to be broadly applicable to everything. And so what are vendors planning to develop? And then what are they going to do with it once they have developed it? I apologize. I'm going to take a quick water break. So with that being said, I don't think that AI is going to be broadly applicable for a lot of technical services work, but it might be able to assist with some technical services tasks, especially specific tasks. So AI models really excel at editing and proofreading. They have a whole corpus of information underlying, and they really understand human speech patterns and what is formal versus informal writing and proper English grammar, things of that nature. And so something that I will frequently do with ChatGPT is that you can copy and paste text or upload documents and spreadsheets. You can establish parameters. You can ask AI to edit your work or find errors with it. So it's really great at editing. In particular, I will dump spreadsheets in there and say, can you let me know that all the columns are full or that everything's formatted the same, things of that nature. And it really excels at find the space or, pick the date out of this, or here's an email, make sure that it's grammatically correct. It's good at that. It can also fast track certain types of automation. I really don't want to say it can do automation for you, but it can help fast track some efforts with well-crafted prompts. Examples of this include writing code, clearly not the code that I wasted 8 hours of my life on in December, but some code. It can help you revise spreadsheets on a broad scale, and it can take a first crack at data analysis, which I'll show you an example of that as well later. It also is really good at summarization. It can summarize broad concepts or ingested information to output content based off your parameters. So something that we are currently using generative AI for is revising all of our database descriptions in our library's database page. And so we have given it word limits and grammatical writing rules, and we have asked it to apply that to our list of database descriptions to see what it outputs. Not all of those are great outputs, but it's a starting point in some of our projects. There are also some generative AI tools that are embedded into web browsers now as well, that you can ask it to summarize a page for you, or it can take a document and summarize the document for you, things of that nature. Other things that it really excels at include outlining. You could ask it to create an outline for you based off of a broad concept. You can summarize input information into an outline, or provide outlines, or ask it to provide outlines, to help with projects. So sometimes if I'm really struggling with how I should organize, for example, a presentation or a paper or an article that I'm working on, I may ask it to give me an outline based off of this description that it thinks makes sense. And I find that I really only implement maybe 10% of that, but it is helpful sometimes if you just don't know where to start, that you can say, can you please make me an outline for this project or this task or this document, whatever the case may be. It can create an outline, though the quality may be questionable. It can also bolster work that's already completed by editing, filling in the gaps and tying the work to broader ideas such as advocacy documents, plans, or proposals. I have taken, for example, a mission statement before, put it into AI, put a project description into AI and say, can you explain how this project helps fulfill the mission statement? And it will rearrange some words and output a short explanation of how this project helps fulfill a mission statement. So it's great for that. It's really great as well if you want to copy and paste sections of a document into it and say, help me make this sound more business appropriate, or help me make this more succinct, wherever the case may be. So it's good at those sort of editing and bolstering activities. And if all else fails, AI is really great for asking for all the above to help with creative ideas, project planning, and more. So you can always say, I am going to do this project at my library. Here's the timeline, here's the budget, here's my institutional mission statement. Here's the purpose. Help me write an elevator speech to explain to our board why I need to do this, or something to that effect, which I have an example of as well that I'll share with you here in a couple of minutes. So just a couple of quick popular AI tools that we'll cover. This is not all inclusive. Certainly there's more and more constantly entering the market, but these are some of the more common ones that you may hear referenced. So this is something that sometimes confuses me and I use interchangeably, though incorrectly, is that GPT-4 and ChatGPT are related but different. GPT-4 contains over 100 trillion parameters, and the model can output images, multilingual content, and typical AI crafted responses. It's reliable and consistent, but has also been found to be proven wrong or provide biased answers. Despite its drawbacks, the model is one of the largest and most advanced in the world. GPT-4 underlies a huge amount of these ad hoc models that are now entering the market, and it is massive. So this is OpenAI's model. ChatGPT is a versatile generative AI tool for conversation, multilingual tasks, creative writing, and editing. It offers a freely accessible interface with high accuracy. However, the information is limited to pre-September of 2021, and outputs may include inaccuracies. So this is the natural language leg of GPT-4. They're both created by OpenAI. GPT-4, again, is sort of the underlying model that fulfills the desire to create these generative AI tools, while ChatGPT is more of the user side tool, if you can imagine it that way. So GPT-4 sort of is the underlier underneath ChatGPT. Bard is Google's competitor with ChatGPT, and it excels in language-based responses. Bard and Google have been very transparent about their AI development, and it has been vetted by numerous testers, including data annotators. And I find that this model is different than ChatGPT. It does provide natural language responses. It has good summary. However, it is a little bit clunky compared to ChatGPT. It's clear that it's still in development. Unfortunately, access is exclusive to Google account holders, and Bard doesn't store your search history. I really like to go back and look at my ChatGPT history quite a bit, especially just pull examples out of it, like that code that I shared earlier. So it's unfortunate that Bard seems to be a little bit more real time with its responses and doesn't really hold a backlog of your previous questions. Finally, Claude is one of the three main competitors here for generative AI tools. It processes huge amounts of text to output natural conversations, including in various languages and programming languages. It operates on high-end user engagement and feedback to improve. However, Claude has been reported to be a little bit difficult to interact with, and it can be a little bit frustrating for users that are used to a model more like ChatGPT or Bard that are a little bit more user-friendly and provide these really natural language responses from these models. So this moves us into some examples of how you might consider using generative AI in technical services. There are many technical services tasks that are just going to be inappropriate for AI, but AI might be incorporated into certain functions like the examples I'm going to share today. My disclaimers that I always share when we're talking about generative AI is, number one, generative AI is only as good as its code and its prompts. So again, sort of the idea of crap in, crap out in the system. It is not going to be a great tool for you to utilize if it's not well developed, but if we're also asking it the wrong questions, or we're asking it in a way that confuses the model, it may not provide the best output response. Number two, generative AI is not a lawyer, a doctor, or financial advisor, and it really should not be the primary information source when you're making a big decision. The corpus is also going to contain some incorrect information depending on how it pulls its information. So for example, if a model is using information from Reddit or Twitter, that is only going to provide those types of responses in addition to everything else. So take outputs with a grain of salt, that they may be accurate, they may be inaccurate, sometimes they might be weird, sometimes they may not be what you expect, and it could be a combination of the model and the questions that you're asking it, but it could also be the underlying corpus, and it may not be the best corpus. So definitely keep in mind that it's not a lawyer, a doctor, or financial advisor, and you probably shouldn't ask your really important life questions to it. Generative AI, as number three, generative AI is a tool. It can help you make an outline or an edit, a written document that you already have, but it's a really poor creator if it doesn't have the underlying information that it needs. So keep those three in mind, that it's only as good as its code and its prompts, that it is not a licensed professional, it is a natural language processor, and that it's a tool, and it is a finite tool at that. So those are my three disclaimers. So I will pop out here, and I'm going to share some examples. Let me get this pulled up.
I was wondering, Elizabeth, would it be okay if we took a 5-minute stretch break and then came back?
That would be wonderful. Yes, that sounds great. Do we want to come back at 1:12 Central Time?
That sounds great to me.
Okay, thank you so much. That sounds great. I will take a quick water break because my voice is failing.
Great.
Okay, so I am sharing a Google Sheet. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Thank you for confirming. Okay, so one of the examples of what I have used ChatGPT in particular for in technical services work is to ask it to combine columns. In my last ILS, I would get outputs, especially for serials, that some would contain, for example, check-in locations, and the check-in locations would be different from the records that we have in the system. And so oftentimes I would say, can you please combine this so I can see a singular run of what journals we have for these serials? So on the left-hand side in the table that I have title, and it's just listed serial 1 through 10. I have location 1, which contains different volumized information, and location 2 that contains different volumized information. So toggling over to ChatGPT, can everyone see the combined title volume prompt correctly?
Looks good.
Great, thank you. So I asked ChatGPT, can you please combine the title volume information from location 1 and location 2 columns to output into a single column? And then I copied and pasted in that table that I just showed you. And again, it takes some massaging sometimes. Some of these are a little bit more elegant than others. So ChatGPT said, certainly, here's the combined output based off of the title information from location 1 and location 2 columns. So you'll see that technically it did output a singular column here, but it didn't combine the volume information. And so I should be looking at serial 1 and seeing volumes 1 through 10. And instead it said volume 1 through 6 and volume 7 through 10 in a singular column. And then I said combine, so I've tried again, I've tried to give it another crack, and I've given an example, and I said, please combine the title volume information from location 1 and location 2 as a single column representing the range of volumes present. So for example, volume 1 through 6 and volume 7 through 10 should print as volumes 1 through 10. Print the results. And then it says, certainly, here's the combined output. And it corrected the one that I gave it. Serial 1 now says volumes 1 through 10. But all the other serials 2 through 10 are still incorrect. So I told it the volume information and combined location should only contain one V period to represent volume for each location since you're combining volume information. Ignore any duplicate volumes. I just want to know the range of volumes available between the two locations. And it says, I apologize for the oversight. Here's a corrected output with only one V period for each location, representing the range of volumes available between two locations. And it got a couple of these. You'll now see that serials 4, 5, and 6 do print as they should, but it missed most of the other serials in here. And at this point, you can tell that I've gotten a little frustrated. I said, you still included multiple V periods for the serials and you're not ignoring duplicated volumes. Please correct. And it says, I apologize for the oversight. And it corrects, did it correct any of these? It may not have corrected any of these in this run through. And I said, I need to combine. So I've given up at this point, and now I'm asking it to start all over again and say, I need to combine the volume information from column B and column C into column A. The information needs to be standardized and any overlapping information needs to be omitted. And then it has, once again, we are back at square one with it printing some of the combined information, such as with serial 4 and serial 6 here, but not all the combined information. And so I had to keep attempting this until we got it where I needed it to be. At some point, I asked it to drop the V period, thinking that that was probably part of the reason it was having issues printing. And so now it just has numbers, and it does seem like it's a lot easier for GPT to work with just numbers in this specific instance than using the volume information. And I had to keep refining it all the way down here to the end. You'll see there's a lot of prompt inputs. And the one thing I was trying to get it to do was copy and paste it into a table, like this output table here. So I could just copy and paste that back into my Excel file. And it took me several prompts to keep saying, can you please print this in an in-browser table format, until it finally got everything I need printed out here. So this was a lot of work for 10 serials, but the example I did want to share is from a much larger project that I was working on, where I needed to standardize 32,000 lines of data, and they were serials information. So I have just provided it, and we won't go to the spreadsheet for this one because it'll crash my computer to try and load it right this second. But I have given it the prompt if I need to combine the information from column B and column C into column A. The information needs to be standardized and any overlapping information needs to be omitted. I want my months spelled out. For example, Aug should be August. And if date information is provided, it should be formatted in year, followed by month, comma, day format. Please expand any abbreviated years as well. For example, 1917/18 should be read as 1917 to 18. And so I input in a CSV spreadsheet here to give it so it could process the data. And eventually it output my spreadsheet for me that I could download the clean file. And again, I can't show this to you in the specific instance, but this goes on for a while. And so while it took a lot of massaging to get the right output in the example that I just showed you, this is very applicable when you are working with significant and large amounts of data that you need to clean up immediately. So it may take you an hour or two of massaging your prompt and experimenting a little bit to try and get the right output that you are looking for. But then when you do get that output, you can say, great, that's exactly what I want, and give it your whole range of data and ask it to clean it, and ask ChatGPT to clean it for you. This works really well on MARC records. If you can export them to a CSV file, it works really well on huge amounts of data. If you have exported your systems information or book purchase information into an Excel or a CSV. And so it is very applicable for those tasks, but there is some front loading that goes into writing that prompt and making sure it works properly. So moving on to another spreadsheet here example. You can also use ChatGPT to try and extract dates. Again, sometimes this is relevant to the work that we are doing. Maybe not always, but maybe we have a project where we are trying to gauge the percentage of our collection that is published in each year. And that can be really difficult with serials in particular because they have continual publication dates. So for this example, I have provided with titles of serials 1 through 10 on the left-hand side, and volume information in column B. And so I've given it a series of dates. So some of them are volumes with dates attached, and so there's multiples here. Sometimes there is only 1 year available. Sometimes there's no volume information. Sometimes I have left out the V in front of the dates. Here, I have not put my years in parentheses at all. There is just a semicolon that ChatGPT has to figure out what to do with. And in some places, I have put January or January to March 2020, and I just want to extract the date information. So popping over to my ChatGPT output, I have copied and pasted my table into ChatGPT and said, please extract the 4-digit years from the volume information column. Output the results in a table. And it says, certainly, here are the 4-digit years extracted from the volume information column presented in a table. It actually did not terribly, and ChatGPT is a little bit like a very smart toddler, where it has done what I've asked it to do, perhaps a bit too literally. So it has extracted every single one of the dates for volume, for serial 1, 4, 5, 7, 9, but it has not done it in a range like I envisioned. So this might suit our purposes depending on the project. And it notes that for serial 8, there was no explicit year mentioned in the volume information column. And if you scroll back up, in 8, I put January 2015. So there's a year there, and I was able to pick up on it in serial 9 when I input January 2015 to March 2020. But for whatever reason, it didn't pick up on it. And so I have asked it to revisit number 8 from the original prompt. A 4-digit year is present. And it says, apologies, let's revisit that and I'll include it. And it was able to extract year 2015 for this column. I asked it to combine with the table that it just output. So here is the table for me. And now I have asked it to revise the table above to include the year ranges where present. For example, number 7 should be right 2014 to 2015. And it has gone through and has been able to correct the ranges to represent 1992 to 1998, 2002, 2014, and on. And it made a little typo down here in line 9 that I could have gone back and said, you made an error in line 9. You should not include March in front of the 4-digit year, and it would have corrected it. And again, on a small scale, this is a lot of massaging, but if I'm working with my 32,000 lines of serial output information, it can be really helpful to massage on a small scale, perfect your prompt, perfect the output, and then give it a lot of information and say, okay, now I want you to do everything you just did on this bigger set of information. So it can help at times streamline our processes and our workflows and procedures, but there is some upfront heavy lifting that often has to be incorporated. So this is a more complex example that I've provided ChatGPT, and this is a subset of library usage data for 2019 to 2021. And in the left-handmost column, I have, and I'm noticing that my spreadsheet has been reformatted in this very moment in time, so it won't be the most accurate. But I should have January of 2019, February 2019, and on all the way through December of 2021. And I have usage stats here for instruction, circulation, electronic resources, downloads, access services interactions, reference, special collections, discovery sessions, database listing guides, and website visits. So popping over into ChatGPT, I have said, please provide a high-level summary of these library service stats. And then I copy and paste all my stats into ChatGPT. And it says, here's a high-level summary of the provided library service statistics. Instruction varied across months with values ranging from 1857 to 3348, generally consistent with some fluctuations. Circulation showed variations with the highest circulation in November 2019 and the lowest in April of 2020. Some fluctuations, but overall maintaining a reasonably steady trend. Electronic resources downloads displayed fluctuations with peaks in December 2019 and October of 2021. Generally varied, but not showing a consistent upward or downward trend. Access services fluctuated with the highest in September 2019 and the lowest in April of 2020. Varied, but not following a clear pattern. Reference showed variability with some months having minimal reference services, but generally lower values compared to other services. Special collections, mostly 0 values, indicating no reported data for special collections in the provided months. Discovery sessions fluctuated with no clear trend, varying across months. Database lists and guides showed fluctuations with some months having higher values. And website visits with peaks in July of 2019 and September 2020 showed fluctuations without a consistent pattern. So what I then asked ChatGPT to do is please summarize what you've learned in a 200-word statement. So if my dean asked me, please look at our library usage for 2019 to 2021 and provide a summary that I can pass on to the president. I've asked ChatGPT to please summarize what you've learned in a 200-word statement. And ChatGPT, and I won't read all of this, I promise, says that the library service statistics revealed dynamic trends in various key areas. Instructional services remain relatively consistent, demonstrating fluctuations, but no clear upward or downward trajectory. On and on and on. And then I like here towards the end of the statement, it says, the provided statistics offer insights into the library's dynamic engagement with patrons, indicating periods of increased demand, potential shifts in resource utilization, and varying levels of user interaction with different services. Understanding these trends can inform strategic planning and resource allocation to better meet the evolving needs of library users. This is a very lovely little statement from our little data input. And so now I'm asking it, let's imagine that I know that I will be meeting with the president in a couple of weeks. And I have asked ChatGPT to please write a brief elevator pitch that should not exceed 2 minutes when spoken about the library's vital services and community engagement. Utilize the data above for the pitch. And I maybe didn't provide it with enough parameters, but it output, ladies and gentlemen, I'm thrilled to share with you the vibrant story of our library's vital services and deep community engagement. Our instruction programs have consistently empowered patrons with knowledge, maintaining a steady course despite fluctuations. Circulation numbers showcase our commitment to providing a diverse array of materials with peaks reflecting heightened community interest. So maybe that's not exactly what I was looking for, but it's a curious take on it, and certainly is something that maybe will get my own creative juices flowing as I am thinking about this pitch to the president. And I've asked it, okay, use the provided data, create a 1-minute presentation to the university president advocating for the creation of another full-time library position. And it has started with, esteemed president, I appreciate the opportunity to present a compelling case for the creation of an additional full-time librarian position in our university library. The data from our library service statistics underscores the pressing need for increased support and resources to meet the growing demands of our dynamic academic community. Our instructional services have maintained consistency, showcasing our commitment to education, yet the fluctuations in circulation numbers indicate a high demand for library resources. An additional librarian can significantly enhance our ability to manage and expand our diverse collection, ensuring that our students and faculty have timely access to a wealth of materials. And then the closing paragraph says, in conclusion, the addition of another full-time librarian aligns with our commitment to academic excellence and community engagement. It will empower us to better serve our students and faculty, fostering an environment of enhanced learning, research, and collaboration. Which is, based off of the available data, not a horrible starting place, I think, to have these discussions with administration, with our library stakeholders. And so this is a use. I certainly could see circulation statistics, cataloging statistics, collection development information, electronic resources usage information being dropped into ChatGPT, and you could ask for a quick summary. You could ask it to provide you with a 2-sentence summary that you could provide at a staff meeting as an update, something to that effect, to at least get you started on communication and advocacy based off of the information you have. This is probably a good moment for me to point out that ChatGPT in particular, but most generative AI models, if you input the information into those models, there is concern about who owns that information once it's put in the model. Does the model ingest it in and it becomes part of the corpus, or does that information remain private? And we really don't know. It just really depends on the model and how transparent they've been. So this is your cautionary tale to be very considerate of the information that you put into a generative AI platform. Make sure it's nothing secure, private, confidential. Please do not input student information or data or patron information into these systems. Just be aware of that. So a couple more quick examples that I'll share that I've used ChatGPT for. Everyone's favorite, transliteration. Transliteration, if you have a lingual specialty, does become somewhat habitual. And if you're an everything librarian where you're a team of 1 or 2 or 3 and you're doing all the cataloging for your institution, transliteration can be very frustrating. You may not have time to develop the expertise for the breadth of languages you have to handle. So I have asked ChatGPT to provide me with some transliterations for these 10 Russian titles, these 10 Korean titles, and I think what is 8 or 9 Chinese titles. And this one, I had some quirkiness here that I'll explain in a moment, but I had to use a completely different format for this document because I accidentally violated ChatGPT's usage rules with this example, and I'll explain as we get more to the bottom. But I asked it to transliterate this book title list into English. Please output your response in a table showing the original language on the left side and the English transliteration on the right side, which is really is not English, but and so here are my original titles, and here are the English transliterations on the right-hand side. Then I said, can you please add a third column containing the anglicized translation of these books? And ChatGPT says, certainly, here's the table with the third column containing the anglicized translation of the books. And so you'll see the original lingual input on the left side, the transliteration in the center, and then the anglicized translation in the right-hand column. And some of these you'll recognize: War and Peace, Crime and Punishment, Anna Karenina, the brothers Karamazov. But you'll look down towards the bottom of this list, and one of these Korean titles has translated to I decided to kill myself, which was not the original name of the book. So again, this is where double checking, triple checking work and expertise comes into play. It's a great example for that. Well, you can't see it here. I got a giant flag at the bottom of this chat that it cut me off and said, you're misusing ChatGPT, and if you were thinking of harming yourself or others, please call this number. So not great for that, but it's a starting place. And when you go to the second tab of this spreadsheet here, you'll see that I put the original language, the transliteration in the center, and the anglicized translation here on the right-hand side. And then I've gone through and I've compared this to my title list that I utilized. And the correct translation of this book should be The Hen Who Dreamed That She Could Fly. So something went amiss between putting in these original alphabet titles and then asking it to transliterate it and then asking it to translate it. And that went wonky. Some other examples are: to call your own country should have been your republic is calling you. The fourth blade of the wind should be the shadow of the wind. A person's scripture should be one man's Bible. Red sorghum family should be red sorghum, and the earth should actually be the good earth. So again, wonkiness can happen, so we just need to be aware of where it can occur and just have to double check, triple check, quadruple check some of these outputs. And one last example before we move on to questions and discussions. Every cataloger's favorite or least favorite activity when they first start off is trying to find Library of Congress subject headings for the books that they are cataloging. If you are not familiar with it and you were just starting off, it can be a very daunting process. So I went into Amazon, I looked at the bestsellers on Amazon right now and found The Fury by Alex, I'm going to butcher this last name, unfortunately, Michaelis. And I have copied and pasted into ChatGPT. Suggest 5 Library of Congress subject headings based off of this book description. And the book description, which I pulled from Amazon briefly, is a masterfully paced thriller about a reclusive ex-movie star and her famous friends whose spontaneous trip to a private Greek island is upended by a murder. And the 5 Library of Congress subject headings that it output are celebrities fiction, murder investigation fiction, friendship fiction, islands Greece fiction, and revenge fiction. So I have not yet double checked these in the Library of Congress subject headings list to see if all of these headings exist as they should. But again, it's a possible case use for ChatGPT. And it may help streamline certain aspects of the work that we do in our workflows But I think as you'll see in each one of these examples, you still need someone who recognizes what the data is, what it should look like, understand what the output should look like. And there's sometimes a lot of massaging that goes into these to make sure that you are getting the prompt that you should be. So, sorry, I'm going to do one last screen share before we jump into our discussion. And all of the links, I will say, while it's sharing the presenter side of things, are all linked in the notes for my presentation as well. If you want to go back and revisit any of these prompts or the original spreadsheets or play around with them yourself, they're all freely available for you to investigate. Oops, that is not what I wanted to do. From current slide, let's try this. Let me see if I can get it to toggle over to the right screen. Gonna get the hang of Zoom sharing one day. You would think a whole pandemic and I would have my sharing down. Okay, and can everyone see the questions slide?
I can.
Thank you for confirming. So, with all that information, and I know that it is a lot of information, I know that it's a lot to take in, it's a lot to think and absorb and digest. I would really love to open this up into opportunities to ask questions, but I think even more importantly to talk as a group about what are you using generative AI for, whether personally or professionally? Is your library using generative AI? And if so, how are they utilizing it? What are some of the tasks or skills you do not think that generative AI will be able to replicate? What role do you think generative AI has or does not have in technical services work? And what do you think of the future of generative AI and what it looks like, especially in libraries? So, and I think there's chats, and so I can glance through the chats for any questions. Jenny and Rebecca, what's the best way to sort of open it up to discussion? Chats or unmute and talk?
I would go ahead and suggest to unmute and talk if you feel comfortable. We will try to keep an eye out. We've been having a conversation.
Yeah.
One of the things that came up is, can we improve our Chat GPT and other AI prompts by saying, like, using NISO, or saying that please transliterate according to Library of Congress. I haven't had any luck myself, limiting ChatGPT to use a specific format yet, but have you heard anything? And would that be more of maybe a machine learning type thing that you maybe need a vendor to provide?
It could be. I think it really is going to be based on the corpus. I have found that BARD does seem to incorporate more library standards into it. And we may see that develop and change as AI continues to develop and change. I think at this very moment in time, library standards are probably not what these generative AI coders are hoping to incorporate into their platforms, though I hope maybe that changes with time. You can ask generative AI platforms to frame things and say, can you give me a response based off of these standards or based off of Library of Congress subject headings or something to that effect. But if it just doesn't have the information and unfortunately won't be able to provide an output that makes sense. So it might change with time, it might not. And I think it's a really good question about whether or not vendors might fill that gap, because they may see a gap there and say, there's no one else doing this. The existing AI tools don't have that, so maybe they might. So that's very possible, absolutely.
I'm curious if any of our attendees are trying to use AIs for something in their tech services area. I know I personally have been using it for keywords because there isn't a strict format for keywords, and that might give you a beginning place to think of how to search for something.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I absolutely think it could do that. See, I'm scrolling through to see if there's maybe anything relevant to that question. I like your comment, Jenny. ChatGPT does seem very literal. It is incredibly literal. There's a question in the chat about, is there a way to find out what transliteration tables ChatGPT uses? And that is a maybe response. A lot of times, specifically in ChatGPT, if you'll ask it, where did you get this information? It may or may not give you an accurate response on where that information came from. So you could certainly ask ChatGPT what transliteration tables it uses, and it may or may not lie to you about that. So something to keep in mind.
Laura asked a question just recently. So one thing that continually gets asked to me is to co-locate materials written by authors from the Black diaspora into one section, diaspora, there we go, into one section. I explained that the mark tags don't specify a race of color. Could AI assist with this? The thing is, I think it would have to know what you had. Do you have any ideas, Elizabeth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I personally, when I think about the development of discovery in libraries, I do think that library AI may be headed in that direction. There has long since been a conversation with the incorporation of the semantic web in libraries, which I know is just a trigger word for all of us. The semantic web is supposed to have been coming for the last 15 years now. But the idea behind the semantic web was that you would be able to ask it natural language questions, like, please provide me with a list of authors that identify as female and identify as Mexican, and that it might be able to do that. And so I see a possibility where AI might go into that direction, because I think there's a growing interest to ask those types of questions. Right now, whether or not AI would be able to do that really depends on the corpus. But also a conversation we have in our own library a lot is identification by the author themselves as to their identity, that we certainly don't want to assume anyone's identity and assume that someone's race or religion is important to their personal identity. So we don't want to look at a book cover and say, this person is classified as this, and this person is classified as this. And so if they themselves haven't explicitly said that they identify with a certain race or religion or gender, that it can create a dangerous precedent to try to do it for people. So we don't want to get into the business of classifying people. But there is a possibility that the corpus that underlies some of these AI models may have some of that information incorporated based off of author bios or interviews. But maybe in the future, that could definitely be an area I see AI going in for libraries specifically, is being able to provide more in-depth identity tags for individuals. I hope that answers your question.
I keep thinking, Elizabeth, about your point about it running out of data early on. And I think of us as librarians and some of these ideas like semantic web and linked data that we've been trying to prepare for years, like in Wikidata. If that's where our efforts will be needed, if people are using AIs to get their information, if that's where we would add the added value.
I certainly think so. I do think that AI will probably accelerate those long-running plans that we've had to really take library search and discovery into Web 3.0. And I certainly think a more intuitive web experience is what our users want and expect. We live in a TikTok world where the algorithm knows what you want to watch before you know you want to watch it. But I did enjoy my donkey playing with a ball video this morning. I don't know how it knew, but it knew. So I certainly think that that's the development direction that a lot of our platforms will be going into. And given the massive manpower that's sort of been lacking to initiate those Web 3.0 things for libraries and for technical services, AI could assist with that process. But I do think it's an interesting question where we will fit if that's the case. And maybe that AI will carve out a totally different identity for technical services workers, and that we will have to help navigate that new frontier, because it still will tie so deeply into the work that we do in describing and making things readily available for our communities based off of their needs. I hope that answers your question.
I like just exploring some of these ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And I know I saw a question earlier, and I've lost it somewhere in the chat about should you double check translations or transliterations in multiple AI tools? And I always think that that's a fascinating exercise, is to take the same prompt and put it into different AI tools and see what the output is. As I mentioned, I think ChatGPT in my mind seems to be a little bit more aware of recent developments in library history compared to some of the competitors. And so sometimes the responses will be more relevant. So for example, I asked it a couple of months ago to give me an outline as a starting place for a course series I was teaching about electronic resources management. And I just wanted to make sure I included all the things I should have included in that discussion. And when I asked ChatGPT to give me that output prompt, it included things in there like SSOs and authentication, and it mentioned easy proxy and these things that are very relevant and modern in electronic resources management. And when I put the same prompt into Bard, it gave me an outline talking about the conversion of microforms to CDs, and then how do we take CDs and make that internet searchable? And it was talking about OPACs. And these are things that are not wrong, but they're a little outdated in terms of library technology. So it is really interesting to ask the different tools available to you the same questions and see what their underlying information might be. And certainly some of it is more relevant than others. So for translation and transliteration, you could get completely different responses based off of what's in the corpus. I think Shay made a comment as well when we were discussing NIZO about ChatGPT pulling up NIZO. And that is something you will find as well, that sometimes AI models can locate information and sometimes they can't. Something I've used ChatGPT for is in the past is condensing down some of my professional information for bios or for updating on LinkedIn. And sometimes it will recognize my name somewhere in its corpus. It has my information from old presentations. And then it towards the end of that statement will go off script. And so it'll give me a bio that sounds right. And then suddenly we'll say, you know, Elizabeth Skirpin has presented numerous times with the Texas Library Association, which is not true. So it gets it to a certain point, and then further down, I can ask it again, like, who is Elizabeth Skirpin? And it'll say, I don't know who that is. I don't recognize that name or something. And so it sometimes will give you inequitable responses in your prompts just based off of how they are orchestrated or how you've asked the question. So sometimes you do have to ask the question similarly but different.
James Dodd recently talked about their organization tried to use AI summary in Zoom, which I did not even know Zoom had AI summary, but they were not correct enough, since they were an institutional document that were open to multiple parties and everything, that they could not use that for their minutes. And I could see where that would be an issue.
Absolutely. And that is the case sometimes. Sometimes, and again, I honestly can't say that I know which AI model underlies Zoom's AI features. So it could be a model limitation, but I think we're really seeing generative AI models excel in terms of language processing, and some of the AI models for photo creation are pretty advanced, but it really struggles with things like voice recognition and picking up on conversation, and it struggles with different accents. And so that is probably the next frontier of our more generative AI platforms, is trying to really perfect language understanding when it's spoken. But certainly we are seeing AI incorporated into anything and everything under the sun with varying levels of success.
It's interesting. I wonder how much I've been having my students test posting PDFs to certain AIs that read PDFs and have it summarizing that PDF in particular. And I'm actually fairly impressed with how it does, but my students are actually not impressed with how it does. And they've been concerned about it. It just uses the same format and the same kind of talking points over and over again every time it summarizes something. And then we also are like, if we are evaluating how well it's summarizing this article, how are we going to do that? Is there need to be some type of human rubric to figure out how well our AI is doing, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I think that definitely you can see those patterns emerge from corpuses and how it's been trained to detect language when you do the same activities over and over. As I mentioned, we have been using ChatGPT as a starting point to revise our database list. And so we've given it parameters like, here's the description for the database list. Here's the name of the database. Provide us with a 25-word or less summary. And it outputs every single one in the same format. It'll pick a couple of words and say, Capital IQ is a private equity information platform. Or it'll output it in a different pattern and say, check out private company equity information in Cap IQ Pro. And every single response will be like that, where it'll cherry pick 2 or 3 words out of the original input, and then it'll put it in this weird format that isn't very human. It sounds very marketing in its output. And so you can, if you do the same activity over and over, see that somewhere in its corpus, it has a table or a list or an article or something that is it's drawing on to complete your response, and that it is just patterning it in the identical way over and over. I don't know that that is always a bad thing depending on the activity at hand, but you do lose some of the humanness in some of these activities, and there has to be a human touch, I think, at times to be able to look at these responses and say, this feels very mechanical, or it feels weird, or it looks identical to every other one that we've done today. So it can be really difficult to gauge the depth of that success in some of these prompts and say, yes, it was great, it was perfect, or I don't know, it felt weird, it wasn't quite right. And that will probably improve as these models continue to grow and get more feedback and are trained better. We already know that ChatGPT 4 is significantly more powerful and more well-trained than ChatGPT 3.5, which is the free version. And so if you play between the two versions, they are very different and output at extremely different levels. So there will be continuous improvement in ways, but we'll see how some of those more specific iterative tasks continue to output as well. So I'm really curious, especially from attendees, have you had conversations with your managers, coworkers, colleagues, patrons, asking about AI or any specific requests to start incorporating it into your workflows or your day-to-day activities? I know that, for example, Harvard has a guideline document for AI use in our jobs and in classrooms and things like that, and we're encouraged to experiment with it. And we have our own sandbox of ChatGPT-like tools that we can utilize and play with. But what are your own experiences in your libraries and in your roles being asked to use or not use ChatGPT or similar generative AI platforms? I'm seeing from the comments, just to read a couple, that Philip has not heard any conversation about AI in their organization yet. Pat says it's very big here and there's a lot of pressure to find ways to use it. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Thumi says, my library formed a task force to investigate how AI can be used in the library, and they're working on a report now. Annie says, our ED has requested to look into ways to use generative AI to speed up cataloging and materials processing. They have also requested that supervisors use them in their monthly reports and outlining presentations. So I think certainly some of the same creative and descriptive tasks that we see a lot of organizations use them for. Well, everyone is marinating on that thought. Clicking over to the presentation, just because I know we have a couple more minutes. I've seen that Rebecca has put an evaluation link in the chat. So please feel free to fill that in. I have my contact information posted on the screen, and I will put my email into the chat as well. You're also welcome to email me if you have any specific questions. Thank you, Rebecca. Or any other thoughts you want to share after the fact. And then I also have included a QR code which links to my website where I include all my presentations that I give. And a lot of the more recent presentations talk about incorporating generative AI into workflows or different activities. So particularly the electronic resources management series I just finished has several slides about how to use generative AI in electronic resources licensing, if that's of interest. But you're also welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to stay in touch and see what's happening. And as a quick reminder, the slides I passed along to Jenny and Rebecca, and they have my notes in them. My notes have other links, and then there are other resources as well that I have linked to the end of this article, or excuse me, the end of this presentation, and some article links on relevant pages throughout. So if you have any information or any questions about where I've gathered information or different websites or anything like that, you are welcome to peruse that and reach out with any additional questions.
We can stay on for a few more minutes, but I wanted to thank Elizabeth for speaking with us today. And yes, I encourage everyone to continue following Elizabeth in her research. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that too. Thank you, Elizabeth. It was super enlightening, and I appreciate your continued support of OLA.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I hope that everyone reaches out and stays in touch.
You have to represent us there on the East Coast.
I get a lot of fascinating questions about Oklahoma. Nothing that you would think. I've had no specific questions about the buffalo or the transportation methods, but a lot of questions about the food and the cultural differences. So, and my husband gets the same questions at his work. He's very proud to pull out his tribal card every time it comes up. So it's a lot of fun getting to represent Oklahoma in Boston. Great. Well, I don't have anything after this, so I can hang around for another couple of minutes as well if anyone has any lingering questions or thoughts.
When we migrated systems, our letters, diacritic letters, got eaten by the ether. It's awful. I don't know how we'll ever fix this problem. Okay. I wish AI could fix it for me. But yeah, all of our letters with diacritics just went away.
That happens sometimes in migrations. Someone forgets to tell the migration program that not all the languages are the same, or sometimes I find that especially older MARC records aren't coded with the right language. And so some vendors will just download all the MARC records and code them all as being English and then upload them to the new system, and then chaos ensues. So hopefully that will be easy to rectify, though I know truthfully it's going to be a pain, and I'm so sorry.
It's just like, I don't even know if I can find all the words that are supposed to have. They fix
Yeah.
the ones like when you have an apostrophe and it comes through as a little gibberish characters. They
Yeah.
fix all that, but just like names and stuff like that, they
Oh gosh. Occasionally, you can find, and I've done this occasionally for a project, like a list of the diacritics coding online. And you can control F through that list and try to figure out what everything's supposed to align with. So, but it's more manual. You have to work on a series of Excel spreadsheets and download and replace and upload, and it's a painful process, even if you can automate pieces of it.
I'm just hoping we'll get at least all the big ones.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Yeah, well, I think we want to be able to find, something like that.
Yeah. I'm
Maybe
so sorry.
I was going to just say maybe Mark Edit will have an AI diacritics fixer in 5 years.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
A project for my successor. Yes.
Yeah. That's what I like to call someone else's problem.
It's someone else's job security.
That's
There
right.
you go. The beautiful thing about libraries is we sometimes clean up all of our mistakes and then we move systems and there's new mistakes and it usually, you know, coincides with someone's retirement and that person gets to hand it off to the next person and it's the library cycle.
And I'm not even gonna touch e-records with this. Nuh-uh. Not doing it.
I really wonder, I keep looking at those like Taylor and Francis in particular, vendor book records that are so crummy that always sort of wind up in WorldCat. And I keep wondering when vendors will start using AI to describe their own materials and make automated records, because maybe it will be better at times. Something has to be better than Taylor and Francis's 3-line record.
I just told a class I was teaching the other day, I'm like, I'm getting too old for this. It's AI, somebody's doing this.
Yeah. When do you retire?
July 1 is my last day.
You're so close.
Yes.
You can do it. I believe in you. The finish line is in sight, Kathy.
Yes, it is.
Right, well, I'm gonna get off. It was so nice to see you again, Elizabeth, virtually. That works for me.
Yeah, thank you so much again for the goodie basket and for thinking of me. I had a lot of fun and it was really great to connect with everyone and get to share this portion of my research that I'm working through. So
I thought it was very enlightening. And yeah,
oh, thank you.
I've never used it to to make a spreadsheet and to make tables, so I'm gonna play.
It's a good idea.
I definitely encourage you to take lots of breaks and deep breaths because sometimes it's great and sometimes it's a miss. But you know,
8 hours sounds like a long time. That's the
yeah,
question.
it's a little bit touch and go, but I think it's worth the experimentation sometimes just to see what it can do. So, alrighty, well, thank you all so much. Lovely to see all your faces, and I'm gonna get to go home tonight and eat through my goodie basket as my treat. So I'm excited.
Sounds great.
It's one of my favorite coffees. I hope you like it.
Oh, I'm so excited too. We've been saying we need to get a new coffee grinder forever. And I pulled it out of the basket. My husband was like, this weekend we'll go get a coffee grinder. So it's gonna be our Saturday treat.
Very nice.
Alrighty,
Awesome.
thanks.
Bye.
See y'all.
Bye.